welcome back to another review, and today we're gonna review random markers. I believe there's 4 in this video, 4 brands. The first one we are reviewing is Loft alcohol markers. These I got them from Michael's, the craft store in America. I'm not sure where else it is. And they were alright. I did notice they grew. So they have these growths. It sounds very bad, but it is what it is. And I don't think it was... I don't know how it grew. I don't know if this is a thing for old alcohol markers, but I've never seen that before. I've had my Copics and Ohuhu alcohol markers for quite a while, and I've never seen that. So that's something to keep in mind, but even after you remove them, they still work. It just looks nasty and concerning. Keep in mind these markers are ages old. I don't remember when I got them. I was probably still in high school when I got them. But they still work decently. It's just those little growths. These just never blend too well. That's the difference between cheaper quality alcohol markers and more expensive quality alcohol markers. These just don't blend. Even if you use both colors right away, they do not blend. If anything, the colorless blender takes away the color, which is not exactly what you would like. I even tried to use a lighter color to blend with the colorless blender, and that didn't work too well. So for this brand of markers, I decided to draw Kinich from Genshin Impact, and I picked him because he's colorful. There's a lot of greens, and I want to try to use the colors of the markers I have. And the big issue that I ran into with is the skin tones, and skin tones is something that a lot of marker brands struggle with, or color brands in general struggle with. And the set I have doesn't have that many skin tones, and even if it was focusing on one skin tone, there's not a lot of other colors that would work with it. So I ended up trying my best, whether I did canon Kinich skin tone or fanon Kinich skin tone, it was not great. He ended up pink, purple, and gray, but what can you do? I was working with what I got. These markers work pretty well in application. I think if they were newer and they weren't as frayed at the tip, or having those growths, those weird growths on the brush tip or the whatever tip you're using, they would have been fine. A lot of them were a little more frayed, so it wasn't that sharp tip that you would prefer. And so some of the colors you could just not get into the details, especially since I draw pretty small. Of course, you could size up and get into those details, but that is definitely something if you were to buy these, which these are pretty expensive. Surprisingly, I don't remember them being this expensive, but they're pricey. And if they do not last a good amount of time, I don't think these are worth it at all. Next up is a Daiso brand. It's called Fluently, and I got these ages ago. Again, when I worked at Daiso, which was ages ago. And these are 2 markers for $1.50, so they are not that expensive at all. They have a lot of colors. I believe I did not get all the colors as well, so maybe there's a lot more that I don't have. These blended not well, but they did blend a lot more than the Artist Loft, so that's already a huge perk, and they are cheaper. The only thing is, on the packaging wise, they feel cheap. They feel extremely cheap, and the plastic attracts a lot of fur, and I have like 3 cats and 2 dogs, so ignore the fur that's stuck to the pen, and it looks wild. I decided to draw Yorichi from Demon Slayer, and before anyone comes to me and complains, I did forget his mark, and I'm not gonna go back and fix it because I don't want to. The skin tones, I had a few that were dried up that were more skin tone like, so I couldn't use those, but from what I have, the skin tones are all right. I don't know if there's a lot more that came out after I quit Daiso and I didn't buy these anymore. If they did come out with more skin tones, that's great, but I can't speak on that because I don't know the color range, so. But I think these markers did pretty well. They do get patchy, like when I was coloring in his darker hair. You definitely see the patchiness when you go over it. Overall, these markers were great for the price. They lasted, they're still really juicy, but there were a few that did dry out, so I'm not sure if those were less tight on the cap or what, but that is something to keep in mind. Next up is Crayola. I thought these were not alcohol markers. They definitely look like alcohol markers now that I look at it, but I didn't know. And I don't have the packaging, I just have the markers and it just says Crayola. So that doesn't help at all. What I initially thought these were regular ink. I don't know what you call it. But regular ink markers, and I've used markers like that before, and I did it in a watercolor-esque way. They were not regular ink markers, so they ended up being crazy, and I do not blame this company. I just thought I'd show you because the way things turned neon was pretty interesting. Here's me going at it again on the same marker paper because I didn't want to cut out a new one. And they worked fine. They don't blend with each other well. they turn neon even without the water that's not needed. They kind of tend to turn neon or a different color when you blend it, so it's not ideal. Next, I'm keeping these no matter what because these are so fun. These are art I forgot the brand name. These are regular markers, not alcohol, not watercolor, so I didn't swatch much. I just swatched the colors and they're great. They still work, they still have all the ink they have before, and I tried to use them in a watercolor way and they work fine. There was an issue with changing colors. I'm not sure how that worked, but that happened and I maybe ruined a piece that I kind of liked, and it's a little bit tragic. So I thought I'd show you again because life sucks sometimes and that time is now. I decided to draw my friend's original character and also a character from my webtoon if you're interested. And you can see I started off with watercolor and then I decided I'm lazy. I don't want to do that anymore. So I used it the normal way. And of course, these are cheap markers that don't really work in an art way. So I ended up messing up, and it's life, you know? Life. So to test them out a little bit more, I just drew some simple art and they work fine. They're markers, you know. I don't tend to like regular markers because they do have that streakiness, whether you outline it first and go horizontal or whatever. But I mean, they work as markers. If you just want to doodle, they're great. If you want to build Legos with them, they're amazing. And so the conclusion of this video is Artist Loft, questionable, but they work. Daiso brand, they're fine. I think they're a great beginner, affordable marker that you could kind of get into. Crayola, I think it applies beautifully by itself, individual colors, but if you want to mix them, which is the whole point of alcohol markers, I don't think they're that great. The Lego markers, great. I love them. Will I ever use them in an art piece? Of course not. But they're fun. So, what can you say?